How to listen to an island. 1. Invoke the wind. In the beginning, there was the sea and the sky. In Tagalog folklore, Aman-Sanaya was the goddess of the ocean and Bathala the god of the sky. The couple were constantly fighting. Aman-Sanaya would stir up typhoons and tsunamis, and Bathala would hurl down lightning and boulders. Some say it was Amihan who used a bit of gossip to start the fight because they were tired of flying and needed a place to land. Whosever fault it was, the stories all agree that only Amihan could bring about peace because the bird was both male and female, everywhere and nowhere. They could restore the balance. And so they did, long enough for Bathala to plant a seed, which Aman-Sanaya watered in the islands they had accidentally made. In stopping the cycle of violence, if only for a moment, Amihan created a divine pause from which something else could emerge, something new, something other than two. Because from this seed sprouted a bamboo in which the first Filipinos slept, caught in a dream between remembering and forgetting, waiting for Amihan to wake them up. Two, follow the water. How does one begin to tell the story of 7,641 islands? Which island? Which community? Which species? Pull at a single thread and a multitude spills forth, impossibly interconnected. The Philippines is the beating heart of the Coral Triangle, home to the most species of marine life in the world. We host 2/3 of the world biodiversity, and half the species living on our islands are endemic, meaning they're found nowhere else on Earth. We're also abundant linguistically. We have more than 110 million people speaking more than 175 languages. One man attempted to catalog these islands through photography. Dean Worcester was an American zoologist who joined the early colonial expeditions to go birdwatching. His photographs of the people he encountered were featured in the November 1913 issue of the National Geographic magazine. But what started off as curiosity morphed into an obsession with categorizing Filipinos according to degrees of civility. A tall man, he often stood next to his subjects like a measuring stick, creating a visual narrative that said that the Filipino was less because she was small. It was as if abundance was this problem that needed straightening out. Benevolent assimilation, the Americans called it. But if we want to make sense of the Philippine archipelago, instead of trying to control it, maybe we should try to think like it instead. The word archipelago, after all, takes its meaning not from the islands themselves, but from the waters in between them. So I decided to follow the water. From the Verde Island Passage, known as the center of the center marine biodiversity, to Tubataha, an underwater mecca in the middle of the Sulu Sea, I came to understand that life and land in the Philippines is shaped by movement. So much life flourishes in our waters because geographically, the Philippines is itself a gateway. Here is where the Pacific Ocean, the West Philippine Sea, the South China Sea, and the Indian Ocean meet. Here is where no island is the same, each coming with its own unique origin story. This geological complexity, this mingling of tropical and subtropical oceans creates an ecological overlap, a crossroads of biodiversity. The first ones to think with the archipelago were post-colonial Caribbean writers, led by the Martinican poet Edward Glissant. He found, in the specificity of a single island, something insurmountable and powerful enough to counter the homogenizing forces of empire. Isolated yet connected, islands are where the cacophony of life at the surface and the magnitude of deep time meet. They reveal our evolutionary history, but they also show us the collective future of our species. For Glissant, the archipelago was a call to action. Following the water promises not answers, but a question, one that will keep unfolding, flowing, and swirling like the ocean itself. It invites us to attune ourselves to what is already there, not by keeping count, but by keeping time. It asks us, in other words, to listen. For me, it's been a journey that's turned my whole world upside down. Three, wait for a place to tell you its names. On the islands of Batanes in northern Philippines, the Ivatan named themselves the ones who drifted. Two great currents, the Bashi and Balintang channels, have shaped their islands for millions of years. And so, for the past thousands of years, the Ivatan have shaped their lives accordingly. Every summer, in the pause between the ending of one monsoon and the beginning of another, the Ivatan begin their fishing season by performing the Kabay Vanuvanua, a ritual making of a port. The port, or vanwa, isn't a built structure like a wooden pier. It's a crevice in the reef, a stretch of white sand, a limestone cove, a point from which the revered Matao fishers can launch their rowboats. In other words, a way out into the ocean and a way back home. It's a portal between land and sea, between the seen and unseen, between that which is inside of us and that which we call the world outside. Vanwa is a place, provisional yet sacred, around which the community itself gathers. But Vanwa is also the Matao themselves, working all summer long to bring home enough arayu to feed their families when the bad winds come. They become a society all their own. And so, by calling place and people by the same word, the Ivatan render the two inseparable from each other. Our colonial visitors, the Americans, the Spanish, the Japanese, they looked at our rainforests and they saw chaos. They listened to the cacophony of our languages and they heard incoherence. In other words, they made sense of the islands as outsiders. So what would it mean to sense the islands from the inside? It would mean letting a place teach you how to relate to it. And the best way to do this is to listen to the people who already belong to it. Studies show that linguistic diversity actually protects biodiversity because the depth of an indigenous community's relationship to the place they call home can be traced in the very words they speak. A single word is like a handful of ocean. Look within it and you'll find a world brimming with stories. Furthermore, language is how an indigenous community takes care of its homeland by transforming their knowledge into culture through myth. But the Philippines is one of the deadliest places for land defenders, and our indigenous communities are under constant attack. More than 3 centuries of occupation and colonization have made it so that post-colonialism isn't an academic idea. It's a daily struggle of living with the pressures of an extractive elite and the intensifying disasters of the human-caused climate crisis. So this is what it means to live on an environmental frontline. We are an archipelago of abundance, plagued by a long history of loss. It's a paradox that I can never get past in any story I try to write about the Philippines, the point at which many stories come up short, because our country's grief is as deep and vast as the sea. To hold it is to understand that words alone are not enough. Makipagkapwa, sing the cacophony. What if stories aren't just words on a page, but also the shapes and patterns we make as we move through the world? I co-founded Emerging Islands in 2021 with photographer Hannah Reyes Morales, curator David Lochran, and producer Sam Zarindin, who's here today, to hold space for our community of Filipino artists, some of whose images and artwork you've actually been seeing today. And the experience has taught me how the singular vision of every artist can help shape a collective understanding of the islands we call home. Because their work expresses the creative spirit of our islands, that spirit which is world building, because the world is always building itself. Our community brought us to Mount Kalatungan in Bukidnon, which is one of the last old-growth rainforests in the Philippines. An island of wilderness amidst a sea of plantations, it's protected by the cultural communities of the Talandig Manobo. One of them is the Kulahi, a group of young performers led by the queer shaman or bailan, Datu Arayan. Kulahi means shout in their language, and this is how they defend their land, by telling their own stories, creating new myths. Datu Arayan wants to share their indigenous spirituality with the world, but he can't do it alone. A constellation of artists answered their call, led by the photographer Gab Mejia. we gathered in their tribal home to co-create a myth centered around Cristal, who is discovering her destiny as a bailan, even as she's coming into herself as a transgender woman. But as we witnessed Cristal's transformation, what we didn't expect is that we'd become part of the story too. Despite the seas of differences between us, Datu Orion saw in each of us a sangka, an echo of one of their divinities. I was the spiritual descendant of Apo Mulan Ulan, who is the keeper of all the wisdom in the universe. We held our grief in one hand, our hope in the other, and in the space between, we were held in turn. In giving us a name, Datu gave us a place in their midst, so that we too could unfold, raise our faces to the open sky, and join our voices to the kulahi's cry. We had become an archipelago all our own. You see, this is the story of our islands, our relationships, the web of care and kinship we spin for ourselves in the absence of formal structures. It can be summed up in one word, kapwa. Mostly invisible, once in a while, a moment comes when the whole thing resounds with the deep dance of an archipelago that has never been colonized and has always been free. For far too long, I believed in the myth of a solitary writer, solving the world's problems from her lonely room. But the islands themselves beg to differ, a cacophony of voices beckoning from outside my window, urging me to open the door and vanish into the night. I don't know, maybe it was Apo Mulan Ulan all along, calling out to me with hair so long it grows into roots, watching the world with 1,000 eyes that refuse to look away, telling me that I wasn't alone, and I never have been. Five, remember, the earth is a storyteller, and we are the story. We may not have winter in the Philippines, but we do have amihan. The celestial bird in Tagalog folklore shares their name with the northeastern monsoon. Amihan actually means wind from the north, the word coming to us from the Austronesians who drifted through these islands, the ancestors of many of our indigenous communities and ourselves. And like the mythical bird, the season of amihan signals change, but only for those who are paying attention. In San Juan, where I live, amihan brings the waves this time of year, the turtles too, and sometimes the storms. Surfers and fisherfolk alike know that amihan is about to begin when we see birds like Chinese egret and little heron flying south along our coastline. The same birds will fly past the Batanes Islands in the north and the Cordillera Mountains in the east, telling the people there that the time for planting has begun. But for the past couple years, the birds' migration has become scattered, out of time, arriving early or late, in broken groups, and sometimes even alone. Fisherfolk and farmers, indigenous and coastal dwellers have all been telling me the same thing. The signs by which we make sense of the world are disappearing. One fisherman even said that he doesn't understand the ocean anymore and will need to study it for 3 more years to get to know its seasons once again. If myth can be described as a sensing into the deep patterns enacted by the earth, it kind of makes me wonder, are we the storytellers or the story? A pattern that the earth itself dreamed into existence. Storms and earthquakes, empires and world wars, extraction and displacement. For the Philippines, the world has already ended many times over. And in March, when the winds change once again, life in these islands will respond as it always has, by beginning again. You see, the world as archipelago is not the new world, nor is it the old world. It's the world as it already is, alive, multitudinous, and always changing. Perhaps this is what the earth has been asking of us all along, that we never stop meaning it anew. So for all that we've lost, for all that we still stand to lose, remember that all of life is a story created by the earth. Remember that ours is a story still unfolding, like an island emerging from the sea, deeper, vaster, and truer than we will ever fully know. Remember to hold on to it, however you can, while you still can. And as the world burns and shakes and floods, birthing itself anew, remember to listen. Thank you. So I wanted to invite, thanks so much for listening. I wanted to invite Sam onto the stage so we can talk a little bit about the stories we touched on in that talk. Thanks. Come on
Thank
in,
you.
Sam.
Hello.
Okay.
Thanks, Nicola. And
Yeah.
hi, everyone.
Well, this is now useless, but whatever. Keep that here.
Thank you. And hi, everyone. I'm Sam. As Nicola mentioned, I'm creative producer for Emerging Islands, and also I head the operations for our organization. So I just want to start by talking about the projects that we do. So to start, we have a project that was supported by the Columbia Institute of Ideas and Imagination. Sounds Like La Union was a community listening journey we developed in collaboration with sound artist King Puentespina, environmental community worker Celso Hukutan, convener for the Hiraya Collective for the Blind, Eva Wang, and members of the La Union Youth. You see, the goal of the workshop was to listen deeply to the biodiversity, stories, and daily rhythms of our home in order to produce audio tracks that evoke what it's like to live in La Union. So first, we facilitated a listening expedition to the mangrove forests of Bawang, which we visited over and over again for all of our projects. These fisher folk used to be commercial fish farmers, but today, they are the stewards of the mangrove eco park. We engaged in deep listening, which is the practice of trying to hear more than what we usually hear. It's the sounds we never notice or maybe even always ignore. We listened to the stories of the fisher folk and how the fish are getting smaller and more scarce. Sometimes they catch nothing at all. So King taught the participants how to gather field recordings, and over the course of several weeks, they collected the sounds of La Union, the rhythm of daily life, the noise of the coastal highway, and even interviews with neighbors. One participant gathered sounds and stories from the city public market, which actually burned down, unfortunately. We gathered these sounds into a community sound archive. So after that, King then taught them how to layer the sounds to make a soundscape or a portrait of a place painted with sound. He made one too, and the soundscapes they made evoked a place shaped by both natural forces and human-driven change. We shared these at the listening event at Mebuyan's Vessel. It's an outdoor artwork by the Filipino artist Leroy New, which also serves as a gathering place on the beach. To deepen the story, we distributed the free zine as well, which included some of the stories we gathered, as well as exercises on deep listening. So now we want to invite you to listen to a quick soundscape that King made for the project.
You want to close your eyes, it's nice.
Yeah.
Supported by the British Council, Wild Patch is a place-based inquiry led by the new media artist Derek Tumala, who was playing earlier, and curator Ligaya Salazar. It's an exploration of the power and symbolism of weeds vis-a-vis the practice of foraging. We spent a month exploring landscapes with communities that still practice foraging as a way of life. They share their knowledge of the local flora as we visited a mangrove forest, a mountain, and a riverbed valley. We came to understand that despite the pressures of climate and capitalism, biodiversity manages to thrive, however tenuously, because it's tended by the communities that depend upon them. In fact, we also learned that many communities didn't actually think of any plant as a weed. Depending on the context, each of them could prove useful, whether as food or medicine, or even maybe poison. In particular, we were drawn to a community called Apoplas, which is the name of the sandpaper-like leaf used for polishing wood. we designed a foraging workshop in collaboration with the elders of Opoplas, especially Barangay Captain Marcelino Perez Jr., to invite members of our La Union community, including surfers, entrepreneurs, artist activists, and students, to share in the living ecological wisdom of this community. Then Derek Tumala created a menu out of our foraging for a tasting dinner. The gathering served also as a space for the participants to reflect on the stories and sensations gleaned from that foraging workshop and brainstorm on how to integrate these into their own creative projects or otherwise. The menu featured dishes such as pickled damortis with wild mint chutney, damortis being a kind of mangrove tree we saw at Bawang. And there was another dish called mossy passion fruit panacota, the passion fruit which we gathered right around the corner from our house in San Juan town, which I didn't even know was there until we started doing this foraging stuff. So it was kind of cool. Yeah.
So next, we have a project supported by the Alliance Francaise and the Mind Museum. The International Ocean Station was a dream shared with us by French-Japanese artist-inventor Cesar Yung Harada. It's a collaborative visualization of a future where the mission to explore and protect the ocean is in the hands of those who know it best, our island communities. We partnered with 7 community organizations in and around our home of San Juan, La Union, to ensure that our process was shaped all throughout by diverse perspectives. Using waste materials that we gathered ourselves from the beach, sometimes while surfing, sometimes while walking around, we conducted a week-long workshop with over 120 people. They were all invited to construct models to add to the International Ocean Station. Afterwards, they engaged in live-action role-play to demonstrate how their models would be used. Turtle patrollers and tour guides, surfers and fisherfolk, tourists and indigenous people, students and elders shared their stories and ideas to create a collective vision of what the International Ocean Station could be. A research lab, a community center, a playground maybe, that, like the ocean itself, is free and accessible to all. The models people constructed that day reflected the insights of their personal experiences, their concerns for their family, and their dreams for a better future. Take Kuya Jesse, for example. He's a fisherman turned patroller for Kurma, the turtle conservation organization we partnered with. He designed a model for a patrol boat for our coastline's marine protected areas, using the same techniques he uses to repair his own boats. He taught us that sea turtles encourage the growth of seagrass, which is where the fish like to lay their eggs. He also learned how to look for turtle nests, not from Kurma actually, but from his father, who knew when to go on patrol just by looking at the moon. He also told us that the intensifying typhoons and the unchecked tourism development in La Union are impacting the natural cycles he grew up knowing inherently. The workshop participants created over 50 models, from which Cesar developed 15 prototype units, which we used to create the model of the International Ocean Station. We staged a community exhibit of the model at La Union and then put it up as a permanent installation at the Mind Museum, which is actually still up today, and you can still see it if you go to the Mind Museum, together with a short documentary sharing the process and stories behind its creation. Cesar is actually also creating a version of the International Ocean Station in Bali, Indonesia, with a floating solar hydrogen plant for a mangrove community that was displaced by a resort. And you know, as much as this model is an artistic creation in itself, it also serves as a public platform and gathering space in which to discuss the climate crisis and center local communities in this dialogue.
So I spoke to you a little bit about this project in my talk, but we wanted to share with you some of the outcomes of the incredible creative convergence in Bukidnon, which is the co-creation of a myth around queer ecology. And that's the idea that queerness doesn't just have a home in ecology, that it's rather the heart of creation itself. We also want to share the good news that earlier this year, Mount Kalatungan was included on the tentative list of UNESCO World Heritage Sites. No small thanks to the tireless efforts and stewardship of the Talandig Manobo. So there were various threads of creativity that were running through this project, and we gathered all of these at an exhibit at the National Museum of Anthropology, which is actually still ongoing until October 11, and we invite you to see it if you can. It features the photographs of Gab Mejia, which he took of the partners in the story, the elders, the bailan, the performers of the Talandig Manobo. And there's also an artwork by Is Sabarte of Apo Insayan, who is the first ever bailan. And then there's also the illustrations of Bukidnon's deities and ancestors, which the visual artist and ritualist Alaga co-created with the community. And the opening of the exhibit was graced by a live performance by the Kulahi Pangantukan Performing Arts Group, led by Kulahi founder Ate Kring, who's the older sister of Crystal, and Datu Arayan, who also opened the event with a ritual. And it was really beautiful to see how this ritual blessed some of these burial jars that were collected by anthropologists and were sitting in the same room that this exhibit is in. Of course, the exhibit itself is centered around the documentary art film Baradia, which in itself was a deeply collective effort and was directed by Datu Arayan, Miko Reyes, David Lochran, and Gab Mejia. This project really brought us back to where Emerging Islands first started, to the call of community-based storytelling. This story wouldn't have come to be if we had approached it from the position of a passive observer, detached from the story. Because what this community approach entails is a closing of distance, where there's no subject to be dissected from above, but rather there's a space to coexist, to add our harmonies to subaltern voices, bringing about a crescendo that overthrows the dominant song. So to close things off and to entice you to go to the exhibit, we wanted to show you a short trailer of the film.
Istoryahin ko! Sala pa mahimong ako! Atoy, at pangaan ko sikaw.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
I think we're done.
Let's all give a hand to Ms. Nicola and Ms. Sam, Emerging Islands. What an inspiring session.